Welcome, dearly beloved, set-apart ones, chosen not by the world, but by the hand of the Almighty. If you're watching this right now, I want you to know this is no coincidence. Something divine is unfolding, and your presence here is proof of it. If you've ever felt watched, investigated, or misunderstood, what if I told you it's not paranoia? It's prophecy. Before we begin, go ahead and type 777 in the comments to declare your identity as one of God's chosen ones. Let it be a sign in the spiritual realm that you are standing in your power, no longer hiding, no longer shrinking. And to every one of you who supported this mission through super thanks, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Your generosity is more than a gift. It's an offering that helps keep this light shining in a dark world. And if all you can give today is your time and your heart, that too is sacred. May God bless you abundantly, in secret and in public. Now let me take you into a story that will flip everything you thought you knew about how the world sees you. Imagine this, a private investigator, not just any amateur with a camera and a clipboard. No, this is a professional, sharp-eyed, cold-hearted, a master at peeling back masks, reading between lines, and finding what people don't want found. They've built a career on catching lies, uncovering dirt, and exposing secrets that were never meant to see the light of day. And now, they've been assigned to you. They approach your case expecting a routine file, maybe financial mistakes, a few personal regrets, even some broken relationships. They're looking for the same cracks that exist in everyone else. But instead, they find something that doesn't fit into their training, something that makes their hands tremble as they turn each page. What is this? They whisper to themselves. No red flags, no scandals, just silence and signs. They don't uncover your downfall. They uncover your design. The more they dig, the more uncomfortable they become, because instead of discovering a liability, they discover a legend. Instead of a skeleton in the closet, they find scrolls sealed by heaven. Every layer they peel back doesn't reveal shame, but sacredness. And with every record, every detail, every scar, they begin to realize, you're not just a person, you're an event. You're not a mystery to be solved. You're a revelation in motion. You're not here to blend in. You were sent to shift everything. This wasn't an investigation. It was a divine detonation. Do you know what that does to someone whose entire career is built on exposure? When they look into you and see no scandal, but instead see prophecy, purpose, and a presence that cannot be explained. What if I told you that this investigator, this master of surveillance, came to unravel you, but instead unraveled themselves? And it didn't stop there, because what they found about you has now made them question everything. Their training, their morals, even their own secrets they thought they had buried deep. They came to write a report about you, but now they can't stop reading into themselves. So, my beloved chosen one, what did they find in you that turned the hunter into the haunted? What divine truth did your silence shout so loudly that they couldn't ignore it? Stay with me, because what happens next will leave you breathless and may just reveal why the world has been trying so hard to figure you out. Let's go deeper. The real story begins now. God's chosen ones, that private investigator, wasn't ready for what they discovered about you. They thought your trauma was just a phase, something temporary, something you'd grow out of. But it wasn't a phase. It was a divine initiation, one that no one explained to you, not even heaven. You weren't gently ushered into growth. You were cast into chaos like Joseph thrown into the pit by his own brothers, betrayed, misunderstood, and left to fend for yourself without warning or comfort. Others were given time to breathe, to prepare, to adjust. You were handed storms, raw, wild, and relentless. No orientation, no safety net, just pain and the silent expectation to survive it. People stood at a distance and watched you break, and they mistook that breaking as your ending. What they failed to realize is that this wasn't your downfall. It was your divine formation. You weren't just shattered, you were secretly being shaped. While they saw fragments, God was forging a foundation, and there was no applause, no ceremonial trumpet like David being anointed, just silence and suffering. But heaven was watching. Did anyone ever tell you that some of God's greatest warriors are trained in darkness, away from the crowd? Look at Moses. His first 40 years were spent learning power in Pharaoh's palace. His next 40 were in the wilderness, learning humility. And only then did God call him to deliver a nation. What you went through wasn't random. It was rigorous preparation. Life didn't ask if you were ready. It tore the floor out from under you just to see if you'd dig deeper or disappear. But you didn't turn bitter. You studied the rubble. You read your wounds like ancient texts. Where others saw destruction, you saw patterns. You started to discern the meaning behind the mess. That's not intuition by chance. That's divine intelligence forged in suffering. That's spiritual insight sharpened in silence. You began to hear what wasn't spoken. You sensed the energy before anyone even moved. How many people walk into a room still blind to the atmosphere, while you already know what's hiding beneath every smile? That sensitivity didn't come from peace. It came from fire. And that fire didn't consume you. It refined you. Like gold in the furnace, you endured what others couldn't. Most people try to recover and move on. You didn't move on. You evolved into something new. You didn't try to return to the old version of yourself. You dismantled the old self and built something divine in its place. What you did was not just healing, it was holy alchemy. You didn't just survive, you transfigured. You forged power out of agony, and you didn't even try to make it look beautiful. This is where the story shifts. Because when the private investigator came searching, they expected to find chaos, evidence of damage, a case of unresolved issues. Instead, they stumbled into brilliance. They came looking for broken pieces, and instead found blueprints. They expected to uncover secrets, but were unprepared for the sacred structure your soul had become. Like Nehemiah rebuilding Jerusalem's wall, your restoration wasn't haphazard. It was architectural, precise, intentional, prophetic. Even in silence, your transformation roared. You didn't need a stage. You didn't ask for validation. You rebuilt without the world watching. And that's why your foundation is unshakable. People spend decades trying to fake the peace you carry in your bones. And you earned it in the fire quietly. There's a quote from Brené Brown, a research professor known for her work on vulnerability and resilience. One day, you will tell your story of how you overcame what you went through, and it will become someone else's survival guide. But what if your story isn't just for others to read? What if it's a blueprint for spiritual leadership? What if your scars are sacred maps for others still lost in their storms? You were never just wounded. You were called. You were never just broken. You were being commissioned. Your trauma didn't define you. It activated the divine blueprint within you. And now, you walk in wisdom that can't be taught in textbooks or seminars. It was etched into your spirit in silence, under pressure, while no one was watching, except God. You were never meant to live only in the obvious. From the beginning, you were chosen to operate in dual realms, to walk the tightrope between the seen and the unseen, between what the world understands and what only the spiritually awakened can perceive. While others remain anchored to the external, conversations filled with small talk, routine tasks, surface emotions, and predictable reactions, you function in a deeper dimension. You navigate two planes simultaneously, one physical, one spiritual. It isn't simply that you're more aware, it's that you have access to a realm that most people don't even believe exists. You hear what isn't spoken, you feel what hasn't been admitted, you discern weight in a whisper, meaning in silence. You notice the glance someone tries to hide, the nervous tremor in their tone, the sharp edge tucked behind a friendly smile. These aren't coincidences. This is spiritual attunement. Think of Daniel in Babylon, how he saw visions no one else could interpret, how he discerned the meaning of dreams and divine messages, while others bowed to idols of logic and political power. That's the level of perception you walk in. Not because you studied the world harder, but because you surrendered to an inner transformation that most people resist. You live in revelation. You operate in realms that can't be seen with human eyes alone. And when that private investigator came in, clipboard in hand, assumptions fully loaded, they expected another routine assignment. They were trained to follow the trail, analyze behavior, and expose inconsistencies. But the moment they began pulling the threads of your life, everything unraveled, not into chaos, but into a depth they couldn't categorize. Their usual formulas failed. The typical signs weren't there. They tried to map you based on patterns they understood, but your blueprint didn't match their database. Why? Because you weren't formed by the world. You were shaped by something holy. You don't just survive in this reality, you interpret it from another. You move through spaces governed by human rules, but your soul is anchored to spiritual laws. That's why your responses seem unpredictable. That's why your choices don't always make sense to others. People expect reactions. You deliver revelation. They look for signs of struggle. You bring strategy birthed in silence. You walk through battles others can't even see and come out carrying clarity instead of chaos. You've crossed thresholds that most people don't even approach. The kind of spiritual crossing that Moses experienced when he stood before the burning bush, a moment when everything changed, not because the world shifted, but because he did. That's what happened to you. You were called out of the ordinary and into a place of encounter. And once you've encountered the presence of truth in the deep, the surface can no longer hold you. The investigator thought you were hiding something, but it wasn't secrecy, it was sacredness. They didn't find inconsistencies, they found depths too vast to label. You are not a mystery by accident, you are layered by divine design. You've done the inner excavation that most people avoid, the kind of soul work that breaks you down only to rebuild you stronger. While the world focuses on image, you've embraced intimacy with your own spirit. And that's why you're not easily understood. There's a reason why people feel unsettled in your presence. It's not because you're threatening, it's because you're uncontainable. You don't tick boxes, and you don't submit to expectations. Your energy crosses boundaries they didn't even know existed. You don't just walk into a room, you shift it, because you're not trying to stand out. You simply can't be confined. You were never made to fit categories. You were made to reveal dimensions. As Cardinal Robert Sarah, a spiritual thinker known for his writings on silence and depth, once said, "Silence is not an absence. It is the presence of a depth that words cannot touch." That's what you carry, the presence of depth. You are living proof that real power doesn't shout. It listens, it sees, it discerns, and then it moves with precision. Most people have never met someone like you, not because you're loud, but because you've gone where others refuse to go, into the inner caverns of self-awareness, healing, spiritual maturity, and divine obedience. While others chase performance, you pursued presence. And that's something no file, no report, no investigation could ever fully grasp. You were never meant to live only in the obvious. From the beginning, you were chosen to operate in dual realms, to walk the tightrope between the seen and the unseen, between what the world understands and what only the spiritually awakened can perceive. While others remain anchored to the external, conversations filled with small talk, routine tasks, surface emotions, and predictable reactions, you function in a deeper dimension. You navigate two planes simultaneously, one physical, one spiritual. It isn't simply that you're more aware, it's that you have access to a realm that most people don't even believe exists. You hear what isn't spoken, you feel what hasn't been admitted. You discern weight in a whisper, meaning in silence. You notice the glance someone tries to hide, the nervous tremor in their tone, the sharp edge tucked behind a friendly smile. These aren't coincidences. This is spiritual attunement. Think of Daniel in Babylon, how he saw visions no one else could interpret, how he discerned the meaning of dreams and divine messages while others bowed to idols of logic and political power. That's the level of perception you walk in, not because you studied the world harder, but because you surrendered to an inner transformation that most people resist. You live in revelation. You operate in realms that can't be seen with human eyes, alone. And when that private investigator came in, clipboard in hand, assumptions fully loaded, they expected another routine assignment. They were trained to follow the trail, analyze behavior, and expose inconsistencies. But the moment they began pulling the threads of your life, everything unraveled. Not into chaos, but into a depth they couldn't categorize. Their usual formulas failed. The typical signs weren't there. They tried to map you based on patterns they understood, but your blueprint didn't match their database. Why? Because you weren't formed by the world. You were shaped by something holy. You don't just survive in this reality, you interpret it from another. You move through spaces governed by human rules, but your soul is anchored to spiritual laws. That's why your responses seem unpredictable. That's why your choices don't always make sense to others. People expect reactions. You deliver revelation. They look for signs of struggle. You bring strategy birthed in silence. You walk through battles others can't even see and come out, carrying clarity instead of chaos. You've crossed thresholds that most people don't even approach. The kind of spiritual crossing that Moses experienced when he stood before the burning bush. A moment when everything changed, not because the world shifted, but because he did. That's what happened to you. You were called out of the ordinary and into a place of encounter. And once you've encountered the presence of truth in the deep, the surface can no longer hold you. The investigator thought you were hiding something, but it wasn't secrecy, it was sacredness. They didn't find inconsistencies, they found depths too vast to label. You are not a mystery by accident. You are layered by divine design. You've done the inner excavation that most people avoid, the kind of soul work that breaks you down only to rebuild you stronger. While the world focuses on image, you've embraced intimacy with your own spirit. And that's why you're not easily understood. There's a reason why people feel unsettled in your presence. It's not because you're threatening. It's because you're uncontainable. You don't tick boxes, and you don't submit to expectations. Your energy crosses boundaries they didn't even know existed. You don't just walk into a room, you shift it, because you're not trying to stand out. You simply can't be confined. You were never made to fit categories. You were made to reveal dimensions. As Cardinal Robert Serra, a spiritual thinker known for his writings on silence and depth, once said, "Silence is not an absence, it is the presence of a depth that words cannot touch." That's what you carry, the presence of depth. You are living proof that real power doesn't shout. It listens, it sees, it discerns, and then it moves with precision. Most people have never met someone like you, not because you're loud, but because you've gone where others refuse to go, into the inner caverns of self-awareness, healing, spiritual maturity, and divine obedience. While others chase performance, you pursued presence. And that's something no file, no report, no investigation could ever fully grasp. They assumed your silence meant you had nothing to say. But the truth is, your silence was never about absence. It was about containment. You weren't shutting down, you were storing up. You weren't avoiding, you were observing. While the world raced to shout, to defend, to explain, you understood something deeper. Not every truth is meant to be spoken immediately, and not every battle is meant to be fought with words. You knew instinctively what others spend a lifetime trying to learn. Silence is not surrender, it's strategy, it's spiritual warfare done in stillness. While others rushed to fight for control, you chose to hold your position like Jesus before Pilate. When falsely accused, mocked and provoked, he didn't argue, he didn't justify, he stood silent, full of authority, not weakness. That kind of silence shakes the room. That kind of silence wins wars that noise never could. You didn't remain quiet because you lacked words. You remained quiet because you carried too many truths the world wasn't prepared to hear. Your silence wasn't a void. It was a vault, a deeply guarded place where revelation was protected, not withheld out of fear, but out of wisdom. What would happen if you unleashed what you knew? Who would be able to withstand the weight of the truths you've buried, the ones you've had to carry because no one else could hold them? What most people saw as passive, the private investigator experienced as pressure. They sat across from you expecting outbursts or oversharing, some sign of instability or vulnerability they could capture and record. But instead, they met someone who had already run the internal marathon and was now resting in restraint. You weren't reacting, you were choosing, and that kind of containment, it's terrifying to those who need constant noise to feel powerful. There is a quiet wisdom that only emerges in the silence after the storm, when the world stops spinning and the soul begins to whisper. That's where you live. You've trained yourself to listen for what isn't said, to pick up on shifts in atmosphere long before words form. While others were busy making statements, you were absorbing data. You saw patterns in behavior, cracks in truth, hidden agendas, long before anyone else even admitted they were playing a game. This isn't intuition by chance, it's discernment by design. Your silence became your edge, and that edge, it's not sharp from arrogance, but from precision. You understand timing the way a master composer understands when to hold the note. Every word you didn't say became a seed of power, buried in the soil of patience. You weren't silent because you were afraid to speak. You were silent because you knew when to speak would change everything, and if the moment never came, you had already made peace with that. Like Esther, who remained hidden until the right moment to reveal her identity and save her people. You understand that some truths are nuclear. They require wisdom, discipline, and anointing to release. You've become fluent in restraint in a world addicted to reaction. That's why your silence didn't go unnoticed. It made people uneasy, because deep down, they could feel something was alive inside it. Not a void, but a weapon. Not suppression, but sacred control. This is what shook the investigator. They weren't prepared for someone who could sit in silence with the emotional equivalent of dynamite resting beneath their skin and still offer nothing but a calm, measured smile. They came looking for drama, for emotional leakage, for evidence of chaos. But what they found was someone who had already mastered the art of sitting with fire and not flinching. There's a quote by the renowned Christian author and thinker Dallas Willard that reads, "Silence is frightening because it strips us as nothing else does, throwing us upon the stark realities of our life." But for you, silence isn't frightening, it's freeing. It's where you've discovered the purest form of strength. Not every revelation must be shouted. Some truths are carried with dignity. Some are held until the world is ready. And some are never spoken, only lived. You weren't quiet because you lacked power. You were quiet because you were power under control. You weren't seeking attention or validation. You were 10 moves ahead, already playing at a level most people don't even know exists. That's what they didn't understand. That's what caught them off guard. And if the time ever comes when you decide to speak, your words won't just be heard. They'll detonate. They thought you were protecting secrets. They came looking for scandal, regret, or something buried deep. Something you had supposedly worked your entire life to conceal. They assumed there was a cover-up, a flaw, a hidden shame. But what they didn't realize was that the secret wasn't in your past. It was you. You weren't guarding information. You were the information, encoded, multidimensional, and impossible to decipher by anyone who hadn't done the inner work to match your frequency. They believed the mystery could be solved with timelines, receipts, and behavioral analysis. But what they found was not a traceable life. They encountered depth, and depth doesn't give up its truths just because someone is curious. It waits for alignment. It waits for discernment. You've never lived on a surface timeline. You live in revelation, in layers, in meanings. You don't just exist, you carry spiritual weight. You are a living cipher, a message from heaven too vast for shallow minds to decode. That's why they couldn't understand you, because to grasp your essence, they would have to stop investigating with logic and start perceiving with spirit. This isn't a new story. Jesus himself was misunderstood for this very reason. The Pharisees came to trap him in his words, constantly probing, questioning, recording his movements. But they couldn't grasp the truth of who he was because they weren't spiritually aligned to receive him. He said in John 14:9, "Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father." Yet they saw only a carpenter's son, missing the divine encryption written into every move he made. You carry a similar code, divine identity that can't be read by human eyes alone. You don't hand yourself over easily. You are not an open book for the unworthy. You are a sealed scroll, like the one in Revelation that could only be opened by the Lamb. Every instinct you follow, every boundary you place, it is sacred. You have learned the hard way that not everyone who comes close is coming to understand. Some come only to extract, to diminish, or to use. So you adapted, you evolved. You became a vault with no visible keyhole, accessed only by the truly aligned. You became selective, not from fear, but from wisdom. And wisdom is not always loud. Sometimes it simply watches and waits. Your truth is not something that can be demanded. It is something that must be earned. Through consistency, through integrity, through presence in the absence of reward. How many people do you know who can do that? How many are willing to wait when there's nothing to gain, just to know your soul? That's where the investigator miscalculated. They thought the puzzle was external. They thought the challenge was unlocking events, tracing conversations, analyzing motives. But you were never about what happened to you. You were about what those things shaped you into. You weren't a list of experiences. You became a system of meaning, a living parable. You're not mysterious by accident. You are encrypted by intention. You were built by divine hands, constructed layer by layer through fire, storms, silence, and obedience. You don't move with noise. You move with presence. You don't explain, you radiate. And your presence can't be measured with files or formulas. It can only be felt by those with the sensitivity to recognize holy ground when they step on it. Consider the life of Maya Angelou, the celebrated poet, author, and civil rights activist. People praised her words, but the real power was in her presence. She once said, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." And yet, she bore hers not out of agony, but out of honor. Her story was never shouted. It was carried with grace, with silence that demanded reverence. You reflect that same sacred weight. You're not a spectacle. You're a sanctuary. The truth is, most people will never truly meet someone like you, not because you're hidden, but because their access hasn't been earned. To understand you requires more than skill or persistence. It takes spiritual alignment. It requires the kind of patience that waits without entitlement, the kind of respect that asks nothing in return. You weren't created to be a quick read. You were made to be meditated on. You are the mystery wrapped in stillness, the revelation reserved for the worthy. And unless someone approaches you with the right key, one carved from truth, humility, and time, you remain exactly as you were intended to be, unsolved, undiminished, and sacred. They approached your life like forensic analysts at a crime scene, assuming your past held confessions, that your scars could be traced like trails of evidence leading to weakness. They examined you with cold curiosity, expecting to find fractures, thinking your strength was a desperate response to damage. To them, each scar looked like a secret waiting to be unlocked. But what they discovered was something their training never prepared them for. What they found were not signs of brokenness, but of rebirth. They thought your story would reveal a collapse. Instead, it revealed consecration. Every scar they touched didn't cry out for pity. It radiated power, because your scars aren't proof of defeat. They are the sacred symbols of survival. They mark the moments when life tried to write you off, and heaven rewrote the script. They expected to find trauma, but what they stumbled upon were temples, sanctified places in your soul where pain had once stood, but glory now resides. It's like the story of Job. After losing everything, his family, his wealth, his health, Job sat in ashes, covered in boils, mocked by friends, and even challenged by his own wife to curse God. But he didn't break, he didn't bend, he endured. And when the storm passed, God didn't just restore what was lost, he doubled it. Job's scars became sanctuaries, not reminders of torment, but proof of divine preservation, just like yours. What they found in you wasn't unhealed agony, it was closed chapters, sealed not with bitterness but with reverence. You didn't just recover, you redeemed. You didn't pretend nothing happened, you faced the fire and emerged gold, because fire doesn't destroy what's real, it only removes what's false. And you are what remained when the fire had done its work. Your pain didn't cripple you, it carved you. Each scar became a memorial, not just of suffering, but of transformation. Every time life cut deep, you didn't just survive. You bled purpose into the process. You built rituals around your recovery. You prayed in the silence. You wrote wisdom into your soul. You didn't hide your wounds. You honored them. Have you noticed how people assume pain is always a setback? They rarely stop to consider that it could also be a calling. That heartbreak can be a doorway. That betrayal might have been the catalyst that pulled you into deeper strength. You live with that awareness now. That's why others feel strangely humbled in your presence. Not because you brag, but because your resilience carries a quiet authority that silences shallow minds. And that was the investigator's unexpected revelation. They walked in assuming they'd find fragility. Instead, they found reverence. They came for weaknesses, but they found sacred sites. They thought you were hiding bruises, but what they touched were battle honors. The kind of strength that can't be manufactured or faked. The kind that comes from bleeding without bitterness, rising without rage, and walking through fire without the smell of smoke. There's a quote by Dr. Edith Eger, a Holocaust survivor and renowned psychologist, who said, "Your pain is not your identity, it's your teacher. You live that truth. You didn't let your pain define you. You let it instruct you. And then you let it go. Not because it didn't matter, but because it served its purpose. It initiated you. And initiations are never meant to last forever. They are the sacred threshold into new power." Your story isn't just a timeline of sad events. It is a series of sacred passages. Every hardship became an altar, every heartbreak a purification, every betrayal a divine redirection, and every scar a shrine. They wanted to see where you were broken, but they encountered spaces too holy to dissect. They thought they were examining you, but they were standing on holy ground. They thought they were walking into a story of heartbreak, a narrative shaped by rejection, a person still aching from being left behind. They expected to meet someone clinging to the echoes of love, still adjusting themselves to earn the acceptance of those who once walked away. But that version of you didn't make it through the fire. That version was consumed, burned down not by the cruelty of abandonment, but by the revelation that followed it. You never needed to be chosen by others to be worthy. What rose from those ashes wasn't desperate, it wasn't wounded, it wasn't waiting. What rose was sovereignty, pure, untouchable sovereignty. You didn't sit by the door of rejection hoping it would swing back open. You built a kingdom from the bricks others threw at you. You crowned yourself not with pride, but with purpose. The pain didn't crush you. It awakened you to something divine within. You stopped seeking invitations to rooms that only valued you when you stayed small. You walked out of those spaces and built something no one could shrink you in. Your worth became internal law, not a verdict handed down by those too blind to see your value. You stopped begging. You stopped performing. You didn't just recover from abandonment, you transcended it. And isn't that the kind of transformation God specializes in? When Hagar was cast out into the wilderness, abandoned and alone with her child, she cried out in despair. But it was in that desolate place that God revealed himself to her as El Roi, the God who sees. He didn't send her back to be tolerated. He met her in exile and gave her direction, identity, and future. Just like you, she discovered that sometimes the wilderness is not where you're forgotten. It's where you are found. You stopped viewing rejection as punishment. You saw it for what it truly was, a release. You didn't repair the space that someone's absence left in your heart. You turned it into a threshold, and through that threshold, you walked into self-rule. You became emotionally self-sustaining, not hardened but holy, not closed off but unowned. You are no longer defined by who stayed or who left. You are defined by the truth of who you are, a truth that no absence can erase. This is what they couldn't grasp. They expected you to be numb, but you weren't numb. You were unshakable. They expected grief. Instead, they found grace. You don't wait at doors that close anymore. You understand now that some doors lock to lead you forward. And when someone walks out of your life, it's not always tragedy. Sometimes it's the first sound of freedom. You no longer ask why they left. You ask why you ever believed they were the foundation of your worth. That question dismantled every illusion, and from that clarity, everything shifted. You learned to source your value not from the applause of others, but from the anointing already resting on you. Real-life examples echo your journey. Consider Viola Davis, the Oscar-winning actress and fierce advocate for self-worth and identity. She once said, "The only thing that separates women of color from anyone else is opportunity." But what gave her power wasn't waiting for a seat at someone else's table. It was building her own. She turned rejection into resolve. You've done the same. You stopped measuring yourself against the backdrop of who left. You became the landscape, the standard, the sovereign one. You didn't just survive abandonment. You transformed it into a launching pad. You alchemized exile into empire. You didn't return with wounds to show. You returned wearing the quiet dignity of someone who no longer needs to explain their worth. That's what disarmed them. They came expecting to meet a soul still waiting to be reclaimed. Instead, they found royalty, someone whose inner territory is so vast and rooted that not even the silence of others can echo loud enough to touch you. You're not looking back to be rescued. You're looking ahead to reign, and in that throne room you've built within, there is peace. Not because everyone stayed, but because you did. You stayed with yourself. And that was the turning point that changed everything. They thought they were walking into a story of heartbreak, a narrative shaped by rejection, a person still aching from being left behind. They expected to meet someone clinging to the echoes of love, still adjusting themselves to earn the acceptance of those who once walked away. But that version of you didn't make it through the fire. That version was consumed, burned down not by the cruelty of abandonment, but by the revelation that followed it. You never needed to be chosen by others to be worthy. What rose from those ashes wasn't desperate, it wasn't wounded, it wasn't waiting. What rose was sovereignty, pure, untouchable sovereignty. You didn't sit by the door of rejection, hoping it would swing back open. You built a kingdom from the bricks others threw at you. You crowned yourself not with pride, but with purpose. The pain didn't crush you. It awakened you to something divine within. You stopped seeking invitations to rooms that only valued you when you stayed small. You walked out of those spaces and built something no one could shrink you in. Your worth became internal law, not a verdict handed down by those too blind to see your value. You stopped begging. You stopped performing. You didn't just recover from abandonment, you transcended it. And isn't that the kind of transformation God specializes in? When Hagar was cast out into the wilderness, abandoned and alone with her child, she cried out in despair. But it was in that desolate place that God revealed himself to her as El Roi, the God who sees. He didn't send her back to be tolerated. He met her in exile and gave her direction, identity, and future. Just like you, she discovered that sometimes the wilderness is not where you're forgotten, it's where you are found. You stopped viewing rejection as punishment. You saw it for what it truly was, a release. You didn't repair the space that someone's absence left in your heart. You turned it into a threshold, and through that threshold, you walked into self-rule. You became emotionally self-sustaining, not hardened, but holy, not closed off, but unowned. You are no longer defined by who stayed or who left. You are defined by the truth of who you are, a truth that no absence can erase. This is what they couldn't grasp. They expected you to be numb, but you weren't numb, you were unshakable. They expected grief. Instead, they found grace. You don't wait at doors that close anymore. You understand now that some doors lock to lead you forward, and when someone walks out of your life, it's not always tragedy. Sometimes it's the first sound of freedom. You no longer ask why they left. You ask why you ever believed they were the foundation of your worth. That question dismantled every illusion, and from that clarity, everything shifted. You learned to source your value, not from the applause of others, but from the anointing already resting on you. Real-life examples echo your journey. Consider Viola Davis, the Oscar-winning actress and fierce advocate for self-worth and identity. She once said, "The only thing that separates women of color from anyone else is opportunity." But what gave her power wasn't waiting for a seat at someone else's table. It was building her own. She turned rejection into resolve. You've done the same. You stopped measuring yourself against the backdrop of who left. You became the landscape, the standard, the sovereign one. You didn't just survive abandonment, you transformed it into a launching pad. You alchemized exile into empire. You didn't return with wounds to show. You returned wearing the quiet dignity of someone who no longer needs to explain their worth. That's what disarmed them. They came expecting to meet a soul still waiting to be reclaimed. Instead, they found royalty, someone whose inner territory is so vast and rooted that not even the silence of others can echo loud enough to touch you. You're not looking back to be rescued. You're looking ahead to reign. And in that throne room you've built within, there is peace, not because everyone stayed, but because you did. You stayed with yourself. And that was the turning point that changed everything. They thought they had you figured out. They mistook your empathy for softness. An open heart, to them, looked like a fragile one. Your kindness made them assume you could be easily swayed, broken, or overpowered. But what they couldn't see was the fire behind your gentleness. A fire that had burned through you, not once, but over and over, in private battles few would ever dare to fight. They didn't realize your empathy wasn't a weakness. It was forged in war. A war with yourself. You didn't become compassionate because life was easy. You became compassionate because you chose not to be hardened by what tried to destroy you. Your empathy was carved out through years of confronting your own shadows. The fears you wanted to escape. The insecurities that whispered you weren't enough. The anger that threatened to consume your peace. But instead of suppressing those shadows, you met them in the mirror. You didn't flinch. You stood your ground. Like Jacob wrestling with the angel in the night, refusing to let go until he received a blessing, you wrestled with yourself. You wrestled with the hidden corners of your soul, the grief that lingered, the disappointment that stung, the parts of you that felt unlovable, and what emerged wasn't a defeated spirit. It was a new name, a new identity, a new strength. Jacob walked away limping, but he walked away transformed. So did you. How many people bury their pain instead of facing it? How many hide from their emotions because they fear they'll drown in them? But you dove deep. You didn't just survive the darkness, you studied it. You listened to it, you learned from it. And through that process, you developed a rare strength, the ability to stand beside pain without being consumed by it. That's why you don't turn away when someone else is suffering. You don't recoil from emotional messiness. You've sat in your own storm, and because of that, you've become a lighthouse for others. Not because you have all the answers, but because your presence speaks a deeper truth. I've been there, and I didn't lose myself in it. Your empathy isn't about pity. It's not about fixing people. It's about standing in the fire with them and reminding them they are not alone. It's about strength wrapped in softness, a kind of fearlessness that's far more powerful than brute force. That's what people misunderstood. They assumed your tenderness was a lack of power, but they didn't know the cost of that tenderness. They didn't know it was the result of surviving yourself. There's a quote by Brené Brown, a renowned researcher and storyteller on vulnerability, that says, "Strong back, soft front, wild heart." That is exactly what you embody. You have the backbone of someone who has carried unbearable weight, and the heart of someone who still chooses to love anyway. That balance, it's holy. It's not performance, it's power. Even Jesus, full of divine authority, wept with Mary and Martha at Lazarus's tomb. He didn't rush past their grief, he joined them in it. And yet, in that same moment, he spoke life into death. He showed that true strength includes the willingness to feel. You reflect that divine balance, tears that don't weaken authority, compassion that doesn't compromise courage. The investigator came expecting emotional fragility. What they encountered instead was a battlefield survivor wearing grace-like armor. Your empathy wasn't soft, it was sacred. It wasn't passive, it was precise. And it left them speechless, because they realized too late that your ability to love deeply came from your willingness to suffer deeply without losing the light. You chose empathy not because you were untouched by darkness, but because you went into the shadows, gathered your broken pieces, and chose to become whole. Not perfect, not polished, but whole. And now your presence alone disarms people, because they feel something in you that can't be explained. A peace forged in pain, a light born from the dark. Your kindness isn't fragile, it's fearless. It's the proof that true strength doesn't come from avoiding pain, but from embracing it, transforming it, and walking out the other side, still able to offer love. That is why they couldn't figure you out, because they've never met anyone who turned their shadows into a sanctuary and still chose to shine. They thought your past was just a list of events, a chronological record, a series of failures, heartbreaks, betrayals, and losses waiting to be dissected. But what they didn't understand is that your past isn't a cold archive. It's alive, it's sacred, it's a spellbook, a living manuscript inscribed with pain, revelation, and supernatural insight. Each page was written not in ink, but in fire and tears, and what was once a moment of despair has become, in your hands, a divine formula for rebirth. You didn't simply survive what happened to you. You transmuted it. You took every betrayal and turned it into a lesson. Every heartbreak became a sacred initiation. You transformed the darkest moments into stepping stones for your awakening. While most people carry their past like chains, heavy with regret, rusted with shame, you forged your past into a source of power, not by erasing it, but by extracting its deepest truths. Like Joseph in Genesis, who was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused and imprisoned, only to later rise to power and save a nation, you have turned every unfair experience into a part of a higher design. Joseph didn't become great despite his past. He became great because of how he responded to it. And just like him, you didn't run from what hurt you. You studied it. You listened to what it came to teach. You learned to speak its hidden language, the language of transformation. Every failure etched into your history is not a wound, but a coded instruction. Every fall became a chant of resilience. You've learned how to draw power from pain, how to summon strength when the world expected you to crumble. When life struck hard, you didn't shatter. You absorbed it. You translated it. You turned it into a ritual, not for survival, but for ascension. But this spellbook, this sacred script of your becoming, is not available to just anyone. It's not something you casually display. It's private, protected, hidden in plain sight. Only those with pure intention and spiritual alignment could even begin to comprehend what your past holds. They think they can understand you by analyzing the timeline of your life. But your story doesn't follow a linear path. It moves in cycles, symbols, divine patterns. They try to read your past like a textbook, not realizing it is encrypted wisdom. And when life tries to shake you again, when storms return and pressure rises, you don't fall into fear. You return to your sacred pages. You revisit your rituals, forgiveness, release, resurrection. You recall the strength you cultivated when no one was watching. You draw on the resilience that was born in the silence, in the shadows, in the tears that no one knew you cried. You don't just react, you respond with spiritual mastery. The investigator approached your life like a detective at a crime scene, expecting to find clues that would explain how someone like you came to be. But they didn't find a list of causes. They found a cathedral of meaning. They found that your history isn't a mystery to be solved. It's a scripture to be honored. Your past is a holy text, proof that transformation is not about perfection, but about interpreting the sacred language of your wounds. And your ability to do that, that is your anointing. Real-life visionary and author Paulo Coelho, best known for The Alchemist, once wrote, "You drown not by falling into a river, but by staying submerged in it." You didn't drown in your sorrow. You learned to breathe through it, to rise from it, to write your name in it like fire across the water. You have become fluent in redemption. Every hardship was a chapter, every victory a verse, every scar a signature of grace. You are no longer defined by what happened to you. You are defined by what you became because of it. And you didn't become bitter, you became brilliant. You authored your transformation, spell by spell, moment by moment, page by page. They came looking for a story of survival, but found a living manuscript of rebirth. You didn't just endure your life, you wrote it, deliberately, consciously, and powerfully. Your past isn't a chain, it's your compass, your map, your consecrated field of power. And those who try to reduce it to data will miss the real miracle. Because the truth is, you've become a master of spiritual alchemy. And nothing, not pain, not loss, not even betrayal, can hold power over someone who has learned how to turn ashes into holy ground. They came for you with confidence and cold intention, ready to expose what they believed you were hiding. They arrived like interrogators armed with assumptions and agendas. They expected you to flinch, to stumble, to fall apart under the weight of their scrutiny. Their aim was to tear down your defenses, to drag into the light what they thought you had worked tirelessly to bury. But they underestimated what they were walking into. Because you weren't standing there trying to hide. You were holding a mirror. And that mirror didn't just reflect your truth, it revealed theirs. They came with questions, expecting you to be the subject under their magnifying glass. But the moment they stepped into your presence, the roles shifted. Their projections bounced back, their judgments crumbled. The accusations they thought would dismantle you were redirected inward, forcing them to confront their own contradictions, their own unhealed wounds, their own shadows. Just like when the religious leaders dragged a woman caught in adultery before Jesus in John 8, expecting him to condemn her. They were certain they had trapped him, but Jesus, with quiet authority, simply said, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone." One by one they walked away, not because he defended her, but because he exposed them. You carry that same energy. You don't fight with fury, you disarm with truth. They thought they were entering a power dynamic they could control. They didn't realize they had stepped into a spiritual confrontation. You didn't respond with denial. You didn't cower in shame. You stood tall in your truth. Not defensive, but deeply rooted. And in that unwavering stance, you became the revealer. Their gaze turned inward. Their questions collapsed into uncomfortable self-reflection. What happens when the one you came to judge shows you a version of yourself you've been running from? That's what they experienced. They weren't prepared for the unraveling, not of your story, but of their own illusions, because your clarity exposed their confusion. Your peace confronted their chaos. Your resilience revealed their insecurities. What they came to label as weakness, they discovered was a strength so profound, it made their accusations look hollow. And in that moment, you didn't just survive the probe, you transcended it. Like David standing before Saul, you didn't need armor to assert your authority. You needed presence. Presence that couldn't be faked. Power that didn't come from performance, but from alignment with something eternal. You didn't fight to dominate the room. You simply were. And that was more commanding than anything they had prepared to use against you. Even in modern life, we see this mirrored in people like Malala Yousafzai, the youngest Nobel laureate who was shot by those who feared her voice, yet stood before the world with more courage and grace than her oppressors ever knew how to carry. She didn't respond with hatred. She became the mirror, exposing the fear, ignorance, and violence of her attackers simply by standing in truth. You hold that same posture. You made them realize exposure isn't a one-way street. When someone rooted in truth stands firm, the light doesn't just shine on them, it shines outward, reflecting everything around them. They thought they held the spotlight, but it was your clarity that lit the room. They thought you would tremble under their gaze. Instead, they couldn't withstand yours. You weren't afraid of being seen. You've already stared down your own demons. You've already embraced the parts of yourself others would have buried. So, when they tried to turn on you, they found themselves exposed, stripped of the illusion that they held the moral high ground. They came to break you, but they broke their own image. They shattered their own certainty. In that moment, you weren't the subject. You were the shift. You were the one who made them question what power really is. And power, real power, isn't in control. It's in conviction. It's in standing so firmly in who you are that no accusation can stick, no narrative can override, and no tactic can undo what's been divinely established. They came expecting to dominate the moment, but they left changed, not because you tried to change them, but because the truth you carried made it impossible for them to remain the same. You didn't need to win the argument. You were the answer, and your reflection unshakable, unyielding, impossible to ignore. You didn't wait around hoping that destiny would stumble upon you like some cosmic coincidence. You didn't sit on the sidelines watching others chase opportunities while you stood still, crossing your fingers. No. You became the gravitational force. You became the axis around which movement occurs, the pulse that shifts timelines, the current that draws divine alignment into motion. Destiny didn't happen to you. It recognized you. It answered you. You are not passive in your becoming. You are active, powerful, and intentional. While others trace linear paths, mapping their lives with safe steps and clear cause and effect logic, your path dances just outside of their comprehension. They try to follow your movements with formulas, but you bend formulas. You rewrite laws. Your trajectory isn't predictable because your essence isn't replicable. What do you call someone who doesn't wait for the script? Who pens their own chapters with divine ink? That's what you've done. Not once, but over and over. You aren't the result of luck. You're the result of alignment. You've practiced the art of divine design, not waiting to be discovered, but deciding to become. You built your own rhythm while the world was trying to keep time. You don't simply walk a path. You build it as you walk. Abraham is the perfect example of this. He didn't wait for a roadmap before he moved. God told him in Genesis 12:1, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you." No details, no destination named. Just go. And Abraham's obedience turned him into the father of nations. Like him, your journey doesn't unfold because everything is perfectly laid out. It unfolds because you move with faith, vision, and audacity. And this audacity, it's spiritual. You don't chase what's ahead like it's running from you. You operate like a magnet. You pull what's yours with authority. You don't beg doors to open. You become the reason doors are built in the first place. You've stopped waiting for approval, recognition, or perfect timing. You create timing. You declare it's time, and heaven responds. While the world clings to logic and predictability, you speak the language of vision, boldness, and sacred disruption. Your very presence shifts possibilities. That's why others can't understand you. That's why they miscalculate your steps. Because your life doesn't unfold according to conventional mathematics. It's spiritual geometry. It's quantum faith. You've become the architect of your own evolution. You've internalized divine authority to such a degree that circumstances don't shape you. You shape them. What others call coincidence, you call confirmation. What they label as chance, you know as choice. Your will, refined through fire and forged in solitude, moves like gravity. Subtle, silent, but undeniable. Real-life visionary and fashion icon Iris Apfel, known for her unconventional success in her 90s, once said, "If your hair is done properly and you're wearing good shoes, you can get away with anything." It's a playful quote, but beneath it lies a truth. Confidence bends perception, intention bends time, and you have walked in that truth. You've bent timelines not by manipulating outcomes, but by believing so deeply in what you carry that reality adjusted around you. This is why people try to reduce your life to steps and strategy. They want a method, a blueprint they can copy, but you don't operate on borrowed patterns. Your walk is encoded in boldness, in resilience, in a creativity so fierce it can't be duplicated. You're not walking someone else's road. You've been laying bricks with every scar, every leap, every whispered prayer. So when others look at you, trying to decipher your progress, decode your rise, or predict your next move, remember, you're not a puzzle they can solve. You're a phenomenon they must witness. You don't chase, you attract. You don't conform, you transform. You don't follow the story, you rewrite it. You are not here to wait for what might be. You are here to command what must be. You were never just living a story. You've been bending time, breaking ceilings, and calling destiny forward, not with desperation, but with divine authority. You are the gravitational center where vision meets manifestation. They say the chosen ones glow, lit from within, radiant, untouched by the weight of this world. But that story, though popular, is only a fragment, a softer, easier version, a tale for those who want inspiration without depth. The truth is far more sacred, far more powerful. You weren't chosen because of your light. You were chosen because you mastered your darkness. While others covered their eyes and turned away from the void, afraid of what might rise from the shadows, you stepped into it, willingly, intentionally. You faced the chaos most people silence. You looked your fears in the eye, confronted your shadows, met your own rage, your jealousy, your doubts, and instead of running, you listened. You made space for the storm and stood in it until it named you. And that name? It wasn't weakness. It was warrior. You didn't emerge polished. You emerged true. Light is easy to admire. It's soft, orderly, comforting. It reflects. But darkness doesn't flatter. It challenges. It exposes. And that's where your real transformation happened. Not under the glow of public success, but in the deep night of your soul where no one was watching. Like Jacob wrestling with God through the night in Genesis 32, you refused to let go until something sacred shifted. Jacob walked away with a limp and a blessing, a physical mark that said, "I've been changed." You carry the same mark, not on your skin, but in your spirit. The kind of change that doesn't come from sermons or self-help. It comes from war, an internal one, and it made you holy. Where others inherit morality like a family heirloom, you forged your own compass in the dark. You didn't take someone else's definitions of right and wrong. You carved yours from experience. Your map of the soul wasn't handed to you. You built it in the silence, in the struggle, in the spaces where no voice but your own could guide you. And that map, it's imperfect, it's raw, but it's yours, it's earned. That's the kind of power people don't talk about often, not just the power to shine, but the power to stay whole when everything around you fractures. It's the power of someone who has met their demons and lived to tell the truth about them. You didn't suppress your shadows, you integrated them. You didn't pretend to be pure, you chose to be real. Real strength doesn't come from never feeling rage or fear. It comes from not letting rage rule you, from acknowledging fear, but not bowing to it. And that's what you've done. That's why you're unshakable. People respect what's been tempered in fire. You were not built in peace. You were built in battle. Even Jesus, in his greatest moment of agony in the Garden of Gethsemane, didn't hide his anguish. He faced it. He sweat blood. He begged, "Let this cup pass from me." And still he said, "Not my will, but yours be done." He didn't deny the darkness. He embraced it, walked through it, and conquered it from the inside out. That is what you've done. You didn't wait for light to rescue you. You brought the light through the darkness. Real-life explorer and author Bear Grylls, who has survived some of the harshest environments on Earth, once said, "Survival can be summed up in 3 words: never give up." But for those like you, it goes deeper. It's not just about surviving the storm. It's about becoming the storm's interpreter. You didn't just outlast what tried to destroy you. You translated it into power. And now people may admire your light, but what they really feel is the gravity of your depth. They sense something ancient in you, not because you're trying to be mysterious, but because you've lived in places within yourself they fear to enter. You've walked through deserts of the soul and come back not with sand in your eyes, but fire in your voice. So yes, you were chosen, but not for perfection, not for purity. You were chosen because you faced what others flee from and claimed it. You mastered the abyss without letting it devour you. And now, your light is not performance. It is reflection, a mirror of how far you've gone, how deep you've dared, and how fully you've returned. This is why your presence shakes people. It's not because you speak loudly, but because your silence carries the weight of everything you've survived. You don't glow to be seen. You shine because you've made peace with the shadows. And in those shadows, you found your true power. They came with one motive: control. They thought if they dug deep enough, if they pried just hard enough, they would find something they could use to destabilize you. A hidden shame, a regretful confession, a moment you prayed no one would discover. They came looking for leverage, something they could twist into power over you. But what they unearthed was not vulnerability, it was vision. They didn't find leverage, they found legacy. They thought your past would collapse under scrutiny, that the chapters you hadn't advertised would unravel your authority. But instead of skeletons, they stumbled into sacred ground. They found foundation stones laid with intention, each scar a seal, each failure a cornerstone of something far greater than their understanding could contain. They were searching for weakness, but what they uncovered was your blueprint, not for survival, but for dominion. Because you've never lived your life collecting apologies. You've collected patterns, wisdom, lessons, and strength. The moments they call mistakes, you recognize as inflection points, places where your character was forged and your clarity intensified. You didn't just overcome shame, you redefined it. What others try to erase, you've engraved into your foundation. This is the essence of legacy. And legacy isn't about perfection. It's not about hiding flaws or polishing image. It's about construction. The invisible work done in silence, the vision carried when no one else believed in it, the sacrifices made without applause. That's what you've built. Not a resume, a revolution. King David's story speaks into this. He was a shepherd, overlooked by everyone, even his own father. He had failures, public and private, yet God called him a man after my own heart. Acts 13:22. Why? Because his legacy wasn't built in sterile perfection. It was built in repentance, courage, worship, and resilience. David turned every stumble into a stone for the kingdom. And you have done the same. You didn't just rise, you built while rising. What they thought were skeletons were actually seeds. And those seeds, they have sprouted into strategies, movements, and visions that now ripple through every space you enter. While others look backward with regret, you looked inward with purpose. You didn't hide from your past. You harvested it. You composted the dead parts and grew a kingdom. When they tried to expose you, what they ended up exposing was their own misunderstanding of power. They thought power came from domination, from controlling the narrative. But your power came from surrender, not to people, but to process. You surrendered to becoming, and that is why your presence is unshakable. Real-life entrepreneur and media mogul Tyler Perry, once homeless and dismissed, said, "What I've learned in this life is, you can't run from your past, but you can use it as the fuel to build something that no one saw coming." You've done exactly that. You didn't bury your failures, you planted them. And now, your roots run too deep for any surface storm to rip you from the ground. Legacy doesn't require spotlight. It requires silence, strategy, and spiritual authority. You didn't build for attention, you built for impact. And when the dust of temporary noise settles, your structure will still be standing. Because you didn't create from ego, you created from eternity. They thought exposure would strip you. Instead, it showcased you, not because you tried to prove anything, but because truth has its own gravity. And your truth, it doesn't apologize, it reverberates. What they thought would destroy you has only confirmed what heaven already knew. You are not building a moment. You are building something that echoes beyond your lifetime. So when they looked for leverage, they found legacy. Not just any legacy, but one born from resilience, sharpened by wisdom, and fueled by a quiet revolution. You were never hiding, you were planting, and what you've planted, no one can uproot. In the end, what they thought they'd uncover was never just about facts or secrets. It was about coming face to face with a force they never anticipated, a divine contradiction, a presence too vast for their boxes and too sacred for their assumptions. You are not a puzzle waiting to be solved. You're not a case to be closed. You are a living paradox, fragile enough to feel deeply yet unbreakable when it matters most. You move in silence, yet command the atmosphere. You remain hidden, yet your presence lingers in every room long after you've gone. Every attempt to expose you has only magnified what lies beneath the surface, a depth that doesn't flinch under scrutiny, a strength that does not seek validation, and a clarity that doesn't waver when questioned. You're not here to follow rules, you're here to rewrite them. You don't just live within reality, you bend it, reshape it, redefine it on your own terms. This was never a story about being found. This was always the story of someone who was too complex, too divine, too deeply formed in the shadows to ever be fully understood. You are the secret. You are the storm. You are the sovereignty. And those who try to unravel you will always come undone themselves. Your legacy? It isn't loud. It isn't neatly displayed. It's in the gravity you carry, the way people feel different after encountering you, even if they can't explain why. It's in the undeniable truth that some powers, like yours, are never meant to be possessed. Only honored. Only remembered. If this message stirred something in you, if you felt seen, understood, or awakened, don't forget to subscribe and join this unfolding journey. There's so much more waiting just beneath the surface. Like this video if it opened your eyes. Drop a comment to share what spoke to your spirit, and share this message with someone who needs to remember who they are. Your support means the world. Whether through your likes, your shares, your words, or your presence, you are helping to uncover stories that were never meant to be silenced. Let's keep the conversation alive and keep walking this path of revelation together. You were never meant to be understood by the world. You were meant to change it.